all those years as a U.S. Senator, and I learned a lot of lessons in the process, and I'd like to pass those on to those who come after me so that we can have a continuation of work that really helps us do a better job. The most important part of this will be doing a lot of good with a lot of really outstanding people, because some of the best policy papers ever written are going to be part of this foundation. It's a real treasure house resource that I'm leaving not only to the Senate, but to every college in Utah, and of course every college across this country. And my goal is to help people to understand that there's a way of being effective, even though you may be from a small state, you may not have a huge congressional delegation, but you get things done anyway. Listen very carefully to what people are saying, let them know that we're interested in their ideas, and then spend time making sure that we work on their ideas and put them forward. I think we can do that. And I think that the Hatch Foundation will lay the groundwork to be able to do some things that carry on the work that I've done long after I'm gone. To me, I'd feel bad if I didn't leave a lasting heritage here, and that's what this is going to do.
Hello and welcome to another Hatch Center Virtual Symposium. Today we'll be discussing mental health in America and the public policies shaping the future. I'm Matt Sangren, the Executive Director of the Orrin G. Hatch Foundation. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our guests, Congressman Chris Stewart, FCC Chairman Ajit Pai, David Huntsman, Heidi Swapp, and David Kozlowski for taking time out of their busy schedules to be with us today. I'd also like to thank the hundreds of individuals from all over the country who are joining us via Zoom. Welcome. We are also honored to welcome our Chairman Emeritus, Senator Orrin G. Hatch. Thank you, Senator, for being with us today. It's so great to have you here. Thanks for being here. The response to today's webinar speaks to the importance of the topic at hand. Amid a global pandemic and an economic recession, our country is also grappling with a mental health crisis. The spiritual and material toll of this crisis is almost impossible to put into words, but consider a few statistics. According to a recent survey, 47.1 million Americans are living with a mental health condition, up 1.5 million from the previous year. This means that of all the people you know, 1 in 5 of them are suffering from acute depression, anxiety, or other mental illness, and they're often suffering alone. Unfortunately, the pandemic has only made the situation worse. Quarantine has exacerbated the feelings of isolation and loneliness felt across all demographics and age groups, but especially the young. Consider that 1 in 4 young adults has struggled with suicidal thoughts since the coronavirus hit. Sadly, this is in keeping with our country's trend over the last 2 decades. Since 1999, suicide rates have increased by 35% in the US, even as they've fallen worldwide. As those who have lost a loved one to suicide know, this tragedy has painful ripple effects that extend to families, friends, and entire communities. That's why nearly 4 years ago, Senator Hatch partnered with Congressman Chris Stewart and FCC Chairman Ajit Pai to devise a strategy to stem the rise in suicides. What we came up with was a new 3-digit number for the National Suicide Hotline. The current suicide hotline is a 10-digit number that few people know off the top of their head. Our thinking was simple. By making the hotline just 3 digits and easy to remember, millions of Americans in crisis will have access to the help they need in the moment they need it most. This brings us to our objectives for today's webinar. The first is to raise public awareness for 988, the new 3-digit number for the suicide hotline. The second is to look beyond the hotline by exploring possibilities for future policy to improve mental health and suicide prevention. The third objective is to spotlight one of the most promising new policy ideas, mental health education in our schools. And the fourth objective is to share insights and best practices for improving social health and new technologies that can assist us in this effort. To help us dig deeper on these important issues, we've assembled an impressive panel of mental health advocates, education, nonprofit, and government leaders. Before we open up the webinar for Q&A, I'd like to introduce each of our participants and give them an opportunity to share their backgrounds on mental health. First, we have Congressman Chris Stewart, representing Utah's 2nd Congressional District. Congressman Stewart is a longtime friend of the foundation and partnered with Senator Hatch on a suicide prevention bill that was first introduced in 2017. Congressman Stewart, before we get into questions for the panel, could you tell us a bit more about your background on mental health policy?
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt, and for this opportunity to be here. Senator Hatch, thank you. It's good to see you, sir. There's no one in public policy that I respect or admire more, and it's wonderful to see your foundation moving forward. And Matt, thanks to you and other members of staff for organizing this. An honor to be on, such an esteemed panel. Chairman Pai, someone I've come to respect as well, and David and Heidi and David, other panelists. Thank you. I look forward to hearing your thoughts and learning more from you, and especially to the participants. There's hundreds of people on the call today, and I think we all share one thing, and that is we understand the emotional pain that many of our friends and neighbors, sometimes our family, are going through. And we also understand that we want to help and that there are things that we can do to help. And I know we'll have time to get into more detail and questions. I would just maybe set the framework by saying, some years ago, I guess 8 years ago, when I came to Congress, you ask yourself, what do I hope to do? What do I hope to accomplish? Why am I doing this? And for me, the answer was, I wanted to work in national security. I wanted to work in intelligence. Our national debt, which was an enormous problem at that time, and by the way, it is equally an important issue right now. I mean, those are the things that I thought I would be focusing on, and they are. But what I didn't see were these other issues that in many ways are more important, because on a very personal level, you have a way to really touch people, to really help and to bless their lives. I mean, the Fairness for All Act that we've been working on, which would protect religious liberty, but at the same time protect LGBTQ rights. Wild horses, for heaven's sakes. I mean, there's an issue that I didn't think that I'd be involved with, and I've become deeply involved with. And then this last one, and maybe in some ways the most important. I didn't know when I came to Congress that I would be so deeply involved and become such an advocate for mental health. And what a blessing this has been for me, for the friends I've made, the issues that I've become more learned on, and hopefully to be able to make a difference and make some progress. And I think we've been able to do that. Again, Matt, I know we're going to talk in more detail, so I'll save that. But again, the bigger picture, big national issues, we all want to be involved with that. I don't think there's anything that's more important than what we're going to talk about today. And it's just an honor to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. I appreciate your words. Next, we have the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, Ajit Pai. Chairman Pai was key in making the 3-digit National Suicide Hotline a reality. Chairman Pai, would you mind sharing with us a quick summary of your background on suicide prevention efforts at the FCC?
I'd be happy to, Matt. First and foremost, though, as the Congressman did, thank you. Thanks to the Hatch Center, and thanks to the Senator himself for hosting this forum and inviting me to participate. I think it speaks to the fact that, as the tagline for the center says, you're all about civility and solutions. And Lord knows we could use a little bit of each in our public discourse these days. For me, at least, heading up the FCC, it has been the honor of a lifetime, not because of the title, not because of the office you get, but because of the dramatic impact you can have on the public interest. And I personally am hard pressed to think of another area where we have been able to have more of an impact than in positively affecting the issue of suicide prevention and mental health. You outlined some of the statistics earlier. Suicide is an epidemic in the United States. We've seen rates now that we haven't seen since World War II. Vulnerable populations like veterans and rural Americans, LGBTQ youth, and others are struggling. I just saw a study in November that said that because of the pandemic in particular, 33% in May and 37% in October of young adults have had thoughts of death and suicide, 10 times the rate that was found in 2013 to 2014. To be a part of the FCC's effort to establish 988 as a 3-digit number has been an incredible effort. And it's thanks in part to our amazing career staff who care very much about this issue. And thanks in part to the authority granted to us by Congress, by leaders like Senator Hatch and Congressman Stewart, who not only gave the FCC authority to handle numbering issues, but also in the National Suicide Hotline Improvement Act of 2018, tasked the FCC with looking at a 3-digit number, studying the feasibility, working with HHS and Veterans Affairs. And because of their leadership, we've now put it in position a transition to 988 that I think is literally going to save thousands of lives. And when my time is done at the commission, as it will be done next week, again, among the many things I'm proud of is the fact that we put in place a process, working with you, working with Congress, to help save Americans who are struggling. I can't think of a better calling for public service. So thanks again to Matt for hosting this conversation, and look forward to learning from the Congressman and our other experts on the call today.
Thanks, Chairman. Really appreciate that. I'd now like to introduce David H. Huntsman, the President, Chief Operating Officer, and Director of the Huntsman Foundation. As many of you know, the Huntsman family recently gifted $150 million to the University of Utah to establish the Huntsman Mental Health Institute. David, would you mind telling us more about the mission of the Huntsman Mental Health Institute and what it hopes to achieve?
Thank you, Matt. Let me start off by just recognizing Senator Hatch and his wonderful contribution over such a long period of time. What a remarkable legacy of making a difference. Senator Hatch, we hope that you and your family are doing well, and we're grateful for the Orrin G. Hatch Foundation for initiating this discussion. It's great to be here to be talking about these important issues. Mental health is the healthcare challenge of our generation, and there's no question about it. And I have the privilege of serving as the president of the Huntsman Foundation. I'm not a mental health professional. I don't pretend to be, but I do represent 3 generations of Huntsman family members. We would include them all, but I don't think Zoom capacity is large enough to have them all on. But we're very passionate about mental health. And we've recently made a commitment as a foundation to donate $150 million to the establishment of a mental health institute. And we're not presumptuous enough to think that we could solve this problem by ourselves. Our gift, as large as it is a drop in the bucket relative to what's needed. But we do want to step up and do our part. We want to be a voice to advocate for change in this area. We want to be a force behind driving improvement. And we want to be a builder of a coalition of all those that are ready to step up and make a difference and bring together not only foundations like the Huntsman Foundations, but business leaders and religious leaders and public sector leaders from the federal to the state to counties to communities. We all need to join together. We all need to be a part of this fight. We all need to be advocating to make improvements, and we just want to be a part of that. So thank you for allowing us to be here today.
Thank you, David. Very much appreciate that. I now have the pleasure of introducing one of Utah's greatest social health ambassadors and a dear friend, Heidi Swapp. Heidi is a digital media maven who has used her platform to share her insights on social health with an audience numbering in the tens of thousands. Heidi, would you mind just taking a couple of minutes to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Matt, and thanks for inviting me to be here. I am a little intimidated and a little overwhelmed because just to be on a panel with these movers and shakers we got going on, I'm like, whew, I'm a crafter. And I come here representing moms, every mom. I represent every mom that is worried about her kids, isn't sure how to help, knows there's a problem, and isn't sure what to do, but is willing to step up and do whatever it takes. For those of you who don't know me, 5 years ago, we lost our 16-year-old son, Corey, to suicide. And I have 5 children. And to be honest, I thought that suicide happened to other people. I honestly had no idea that it was something that I was actually dealing with. I didn't know the first thing about suicide. I didn't know anything about prevention of suicide. And the reality is that has all changed for me and for my family. And you're about to introduce my dear friend, David, who is also here with me today, who was Corey's therapist. And together we have stepped up to create a podcast for parents. And even though that's just a small thing, it's going to take, people talk about pronged approaches. We need a lot of prongs. This 3-digit number is an incredible effort, and I love everything about it. But we got to keep moving, and we got to keep moving hard and fast. And so that's why I'm here. I'm honored and privileged, and there's no effort that is wasted in this effort.
Thank you, Heidi. As you stated, I'd like to introduce David Kozlowski, a licensed marriage and family therapist who has been working in mental health for the past 21 years. David has developed a pioneering social health curriculum that is already making a big difference in Utah communities. David, would you also mind giving us a brief summary of your background? Welcome.
Well, welcome. Thank you very much, Matt. And like everyone else, I would like to take a very big moment to thank the Orrin Hatch Foundation, all the panel members. Everyone has their own professional background that's led us to this specific point where we're in 2021 and we're saying we got to figure out something collectively. And you guys already kicked it off by creating a 3-digit number. And I'll brag about that in a few moments when we get to that point, because I have a lot of great things to say about the 3-digit number. So thank you to Senator Hatch and everybody that was a part of doing that and putting that together. About myself, I've been in mental health for over 21 years now. And, much like Heidi sitting here saying, she feels, very fortunate to be here on this call. I feel very fortunate to be here on this call, and also had no idea, like many of you, that we're ever going to be on a call like this in the future. Thanks to David Huntsman's family that's done so much for the University of Utah with the cancer research and now with mental health. I was actually one of the beneficiaries a long time ago, and nobody knew this, but I'd played football at the University of Utah, where his family's been hugely supportive of that university. And I had a very serious suicide attempt. And this was back in the 90s. And at that particular time, if you had asked me what I was going to do as an adult, it would have been hopefully play in the NFL like all young men want to do. But it come to find out that having gone through treatment, having gone through counseling at that university that they're sponsoring and supporting right now with their mental health hospital, that's why I'm still here. So turns out I became a mental health professional, and I decided to start working with youth. I was adopted when I was younger, had a lot of stuff going on that a lot of youth today still have going on. And I found out through counseling and through treatment and through all these different types of supports that are out there that are available, you can get through basically anything as long as you have the right people to have your back. And so that's what I'm here to talk about, my experience and about the social health curriculum that we developed for schools to help focus specifically on using relationships to help people with their mental health.
Thanks, David. That was powerful. Appreciate that. And thanks again to all the panelists for joining us today. Let's get into the Q&A portion of our program, and I'd like to begin with Congressman Chris Stewart. Congressman Stewart, it'd be great to learn more about your personal reasons for getting involved in mental health policy. What experiences have motivated you to be such a tireless advocate on suicide prevention in Congress?
Yeah. Again, it wasn't something that I saw coming, but I think it comes down to, as you said, Matt, some experiences I had, and I think I can synopsize those with some numbers. Let's start out with the biggest number, infinity. And actually, infinity is not, I think, the best way to say it. Better way maybe is to say all of us. I think, I don't know a family that, or a group of friends that has not had someone that they love, that they care about, who's been impacted by mental illness. And I remember having a conversation probably 6 years ago now. And it was a group of about 50 people, and we were talking about these issues. And I asked them, how many of you have been impacted by, suicide attempt, or someone in your family who's actually taken their own life, or someone who's dealt with mental illness? And you could kind of see the group kind of rustles around, and a few people raise their hand. And, and I realized that that wasn't true. The number of people who raised their hand just didn't reflect the reality. And asking those who have been affected by mental illness is not the same in our culture as asking, have you been affected by cancer? I mean, it's difficult for people to acknowledge and talk about it. I mean, that's the bad news. The good news is it's becoming easier. And because of efforts like this, it's becoming much easier for us to be open and to be honest and to recognize. And it's so important for people to feel like, hey, I'm not alone. Because when you feel isolated and you feel like, I'm the only person who feels this way, I'm the only person who's dealt with this, because people around you aren't sharing their experiences. It's one of the primary, I think, and I'm not a counselor, but in my own experience with people that I care about, it's one of the primary, I think, necessities is for us to show those people we care about, hey, you're not alone. You're not the only one who's felt with this. And by the way, many of us feel better. The second number I'd talk about is 5, and that is Utah, 5th highest suicide rate in the country. And when I tell that to people, a lot of times they're shocked. Some people just frankly don't believe it. Because we think our culture here is a little different. We're a little more embracing, a little more caring, a little softer. And I wish we understood why that was true. And the truth is we really don't. But this isn't something that we look at New York and California and say, well, they've got a problem, but we're okay. I mean, this is a deep problem in our state. And that was one of the reasons when I learned that, I felt like we had to get involved. Every 11 minutes, someone in the United States takes their own life, and the rate in Utah isn't much better. Last 2 numbers I'll share with you. The number 6, 16 suicides in a school district that I represent a few years ago. And you can't look at that. Look at a small town. This wasn't, downtown Salt Lake City or one of the large suburbs. This was a small town that had 16 suicides. And then the last thing, the number 2, I had 2 very personal, very powerful conversations that drove me to get involved with this. One of them, flying back from DC, sitting next to a gentleman, I won't say his name, but all of you would know him. He's very well known in the community and in the state. One of the finest people that I know. And he shared with me his experience when his teenage son took his own life. I had no idea that his family had been through that. And to see how they had responded, how they had taken or were in the process of taking this incredible tragedy that I think there before the grace of God go any one of us, that we would have as a parent to live through that. And Heidi, my heart goes out to you and your family, anyone who deals with that. My respect and admiration for people who can successfully navigate that, nearly impossible to really express. But as I got to know and work with him, and then the second personal conversation was with a parent who they came to me in my office in DC and described their own teenage daughter as well. And after those 2 conversations, which just coincidentally, not because of any intent, it just happened that they both took place within a matter of a few days. I just realized this is something I really need to, I really want to become more involved with. I really want to become an advocate. And then shortly after that, was the genesis of this idea that we've been able to work with Lauren on the 688 or the 988 number. And that was a tool. It's not the end at the end all. It's not the last thing we need to do, but it's an important step. So I think, Matt, I mean, that synopsizes a lot of different things, but I think that's a pretty good explanation of for why myself I've become involved with this and just become such a passionate advocate for it.
Thank you for that. Just on those same lines, as we come to you, Chairman Pai, let's learn about your background on why you felt it was such a priority over the FCC. I mean, this dates back to 2017. Could you share with us what your background and experience is? And also, just relatedly, curious, since you're here representing the FCC, how did your agency arrive at 988 as the 3-digit number instead of, another N11 code? When I say N11, obviously the 911s, the 611s. Kind of curious to know some of those. What went behind the scenes there?
Both good questions. First, I would say, with respect to the first question, part of the reason why I've been involved in this issue is personal. Someone very close to me died by suicide a couple of years ago. And nary a day goes by that I don't think of him and wonder where he would be and what he would be saying, and the emails and chats and everything we would share. And so to Ms. Swab, I think prayers with you, because I know that pain, and I can't even imagine what it must be like to be a parent. And you too, Mr. Kozlowski, thank you for your strong statement as well on that front. And so I guess moving to the professional, the reason why I'm involved is because of the law. Sorry about that, but I do, yeah. Anyway, part of the reason why I think about it is because of the law that Congressman Stewart passed, and it tasked us with looking at the feasibility of setting up a 3-digit number. And so I asked the FCC staff to take a careful look in 2018 and 2019. They issued a staff report in August of 2019 that went through all of the different options, all of the N11 options, as you mentioned, 211, 511, 611, and 911, et cetera, and also looked at some of the 3-digit numbers. And what we found over time is that as we went through those N11s, every single one of them had a fly in the ointment, so to speak. For example, 611 is most commonly used for wireless and wireline telephone service repair calls. 211 and 311 are already established and are used for other purposes. And so as we were thinking about it, the worst thing we thought was to pick a number that had dual uses, and that it would create consumer confusion. And you would have to have somebody really well trained on the other end to know, okay, this is a suicide prevention call, this is a telecom repair call. That's not something that they're trained to do. So then we came to 988. And 988 is relatively unused. There are only a certain number of area codes that allow it as a prefix. And it was almost like a greenfield number, so to speak. And importantly for me, one of the things I found decisive is that it has an echo of 911, that number that every person in this country knows. My own kids know it by heart now. If there's trouble, call 911. And my vision for the future was that in time, we will come to see 988 in the same way. It's going to become common for people to say to their friends and loved ones, oh, you're struggling. Hey, I know that there's some great counselors, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Call 988, because it can be difficult in a pinch to remember 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-8255. Difficult to remember an 11-digit number, but 988 we thought would be easier. Then we had to think about the implementation issues, and I'd be happy to get into that a little later, but from an implementation standpoint, transitioning that number to 988 we thought would be much easier, much quicker, as opposed to some of the other numbers, given some of the technical complexities there. So here too, I don't have the expertise that Ms. Swap, Mr. Kozlowski have. I don't have the knowledge that Mr. Huntsman or Congressman Stewart has, but what we do have is some knowledge about how the numbering system works. And our goal is pretty simple, and I'm sure my co-panelists share it too. Match those millions of Americans who are struggling, often in silence, and they perceive they're in isolation, match them with people who can help. And I've had a chance to visit with some of the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline centers, including one almost a year ago in Toledo, Ohio. And I'm telling you, to talk to some of those counselors, these are people who really care about their fellow Americans. And I think that so many of them would be saved. The people who are struggling would be saved with just that one phone call. I think 988 is going to be the linkage between those two groups. And I can't wait to see it transpire in the years to come.
Thank you
Hey,
for that.
Matt, can I jump in real quick?
Yes, Congressman.
I just have to get recognition to Chairman Pai. I fear that had we not had him in the position he was in, if we'd had someone else there who just didn't share the same interests, wasn't willing to be as such an advocate and so progressive and aggressive on this. So Chairman, you just did an outstanding job. We felt like you were our friend the entire time. We felt like you were trying to work with us the entire time. It took, as you know, years, and we'll talk more about that, I think, in a little bit. This wasn't easy. But Chairman, I mean, I never felt like you weren't on our side, and we're so grateful that you were willing to, in many ways, put you and your commission in a position where you became our strongest advocates, and we thank you for that.
Oh, thank you so much, Congressman. I really appreciate the kind words. And thanks for that seminal meeting we had 2.5 years ago where you and Senator Hatch impressed upon me the importance of the issue. It was a motivating factor for me throughout and will be to the commission in the years to come.
Well, if you did nothing else in your time in the commission but this, and I know you've done many other things, but if you did nothing else but this, you can leave with a great deal of pride in your service.
Well, thanks so much. To follow Mr. Kozlowski's comments, I could have made it in the NFL, but I chose to focus on telecom regulation instead. So hopefully I produce some results.
Well, I will say just having the FCC chairman here who's in charge of the numbers and then the legislator on the line as well, who's in charge, who passed, this is a very surreal experience to have you both connecting. So again, it's such an honor to have you all here. David Huntsman, let's talk about what you all are doing. You mentioned about the generous contribution, the gift that your family made. What did prompt the Huntsman Foundation to get involved in mental health advocacy?
Well, thank you, Matt, and kudos to Representative Stewart and Chairman Pai. Your efforts will bless people's lives for years to come. Thank you for your good work. And our foundation, our family motivation behind mental health is it's simple and it's personal. And it's because Heidi and David and their bravery and their courage to share their own experiences and their situations, their experiences and what they've seen is no different than our family. And, I'm the middle of 9 children. And my older sister, Kathleen, my angel sister, who's a 1.5 years older than me, she's no longer here. She lost her life, struggled her whole life with mental health. And, we never recognized it at the time. We never acknowledged it. And, she's gone. And in hindsight, we could look back and we wish we would have done more, but we didn't. But we're going to do more going forward. And so, I'm grateful for Heidi and David and all others that are willing to step up and share their personal experiences because they're not unique. And it's not acceptable. It's not okay that people are suffering in silence. But from a foundation standpoint, my father had a particular soft spot in his heart for people that suffered and for people that struggled, in most cases through no fault of their own. And he established this foundation and committed all of his personal resources to go into this foundation to help the poor and the needy and the sick and the afflicted. And he took his motivation and his charge from the New Testament, Matthew chapter 5. He loved that, about helping those in need. And our family has been involved for decades now, and a lot of social services to be able to help those people. That's our focus and that's our priority as a foundation. And so we've been working with Catholic Community Services and supporting their great efforts and the YWCA and those advocating on behalf of the homeless and involved in healthcare areas. And all those needs are different, but we noticed that every organization in which we were involved usually had an underlying factor driving the need, and that was mental health challenges and issues that affect so many people, that impact society. And we made a decision that, rather than try to chase after 10 different causes, we were going to try to focus our resources to really address mental health and to make that our big generational commitment. Much like my father spent 20, 25 years focused on cancer and building a world-class institute, we're going to do the same thing in mental health, and we're going to become the standard. We can do that here. And we want to be, the entity that every other community looks at and says they're doing it right in mental health, and we want to follow their example. And that's our goal, and that's our aspiration, and that's why we're doing this. And we know this isn't an easy challenge, and it's not going to be solved in a matter of weeks or months or even years. But we hope that 5 or 10 years from now, we could look back and say, yeah, we did make a difference. We were able to help those people that suffer, and we gave voice to those that didn't have a voice, and we made resources and services available to help those people that were in greatest need.
Thanks, David. I have no doubt it's in your DNA. You all will do this. So thank you for that. Thank you. Heidi, you have a powerful story, a personal story to tell. Would you mind sharing with our audience how you became an ambassador for social health?
Well, I can't tell my story without showing a picture of my boy. So I've asked that we share this photo. This is Corey, and Corey here in this picture is just 15, towering over his mom, an athlete, a friend, and turns out struggling deeply, even more than his mom knew about, with depression and anxiety. And at the time this photo was taken, if anybody would have told me that there was a suicide in my future, I would have no way believed that. Not this kid, and that's something that is really important. You cannot see this with your eyes. There's no x-ray, there's no tests that we can take to figure out who's struggling and who's suffering. When this happened, I was so shocked. I honestly didn't know what to do, and I thought, okay, do I start a foundation? Do we do a run? Do I sell t-shirts? Do we sell bumper stickers? What do we do? What do we do? I wanted to do something, but I literally knew nothing. I was in so much shock and in so much grief and in such a huge loss. I felt like a horrible person, a horrible mom. I felt just like completely lost, right? And I turned to the only person that linked me to Corey at that time, which was his therapist. And I said, what is happening? How did I miss this? What is going on? And I went about 2 years of wondering, what am I going to do? And David was coaching me and helping me, counseling me, and helping me understand. And I learned, actually, started to learn about what people are going through, what parents could do different, ways that I could change my approach so that I had greater influence on my kids, on my community, on other parents. And that learning changed everything for me. It changed who I am as a person. It changed my perspective, my outlook, my capacity. And I'm not going to tell you that like I've learned everything and that I'm perfect and that I'm healed. I'm not. But what I know is that learning changes everything. There's this huge stigma on, we don't want therapy because then we're broken, or it costs too much or whatever. Like the limits and the walls around anybody that needs this help are high, whether we put those limits on ourselves or we have them externally, right? I believe fully, wholeheartedly that if we can teach people, give people tools, that learning, starting at a young age, we will change everything. And that learning, I believe the most powerful place to teach people is in schools. There's no more barriers, right? They got to be there. We can force them to be there. We can get them to listen, and we can get them to learn, and we can empower them we can change lives with that learning. And it's learning that just isn't happening. It's learning that you got to pay for, you got to sit in a room with a therapist for. It's learning that you've got to seek out and want. But that's what made me want to be this social health advocate, was that I believe, actually David and I started a podcast and started to talk about these things, and it was amazing to hear back from people as their eyes were just kind of opened and realized, okay, so if I approach my relationships in this way, I improve the way people are feeling. And there's this adage, and I don't know where David got it, but he says it all the time. I'm sure someplace: better relationships equals a better life. The better our relationships are, the stronger our relationships, the better our life is. And I believe that as we create educational tools to help kids improve their relationship with kids around them, with their friends, with their teachers, with social media, they will be stronger and healthier mentally and emotionally.
Thanks, Heidi. I want to do another question here with you. When we talk about Corey, your son, and we talk about the emergence of this new 3-digit number, and its effort in saving lives, especially among teens, how effective do you think that, had that number been in place at the time, how effective do you think it would be for, or better question, do you think it will have the impact that is intended for the younger kids? It's not a long 10-digit number, as Chairman Pai suggested. It's 988. We've got to get folks thinking about that number, but curious to know your thought as a mother on that.
I think a lot about what I could have done different. And that it's a haunting thought. And I don't know. But what I do know is that we never had a conversation about suicide, not even once. I think that if this conversation was happening in our home, if it was happening in schools, if it was popping up on social media, if it was on billboards, if it was on TV, if it was all around and they knew, it would sink in. You would know where to turn, because 100% people do not know where to go to get help. They don't, especially when it starts crashing down, when things start going wrong, because it just becomes this crisis situation, right? What I am the most excited about on this 3-digit number is like the hype. I want to be part of the hype. I want to see billboards. I want to see Snapchat filters. I want to see Facebook ads. I want 988 to be everywhere. I want everyone to know about it, right? I'll wear a t-shirt. I don't care what I have to do, because that's what we need. We need this conversation loud and proud and straight up, not like sugar-coated or tried to make sound nice or anything. We need to hit this straight on. And when they know about it, when there's a crisis, they will know that there's an option. And I don't know what would help, but I know that those conversations change lives. I know that talking about it, and this gives us like this gigantic talking point. So I'm excited about that.
Thank you for that. While on that point, I wanted to ask Chairman Pai, how do we get that, like she said, the billboards and the attention to that number of 988? I know that there are efforts underway. Do you have any inside scoop here for us?
So I think it's going to require a very strong public-private partnership. Now, the FCC doesn't have direct authority here. It's more the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Veterans Affairs, in particular SAMHSA, which handles mental health and suicide issues at HHS, and a particular group of the Department of Veterans Affairs, as well as Congress, hopefully allocating some resources for this purpose as well. And there's a whole host of private sector entities, the Huntsman Foundation, Centerstone, the Trevor Project, all kinds of individuals like that who've come together for this cause. And I hope that in the lead up to 988, there's going to be an awareness campaign like that. Now, one of the things I should have flagged is 988 will become operational in July of 2022. And it takes that long. I know that's a long time, but it takes that long because some of our telephone networks have to be reconfigured in area codes where there's 7-digit dialing and 988 is one of the prefixes, the first 3 digits. We need to reconfigure all that equipment, reprogram some of the switches and the like. And that's going to take a little bit of time. So that gives us a little bit of lead up to build that awareness campaign. I think the good news is that, at least to me, whenever I push this message out on social media, and I'm pretty aggressive in doing so, it's incredible the feedback I get. And I also see others in the public eye doing the same. For example, Dak Prescott, the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys, you might have seen that when he talked about his brother passing away and he had some struggles that he needed somebody to talk to. And instead of what you might have seen in years past, people, making fun of him or questioning his toughness, what you really saw now is players and fans like me rallying around him, because I think there is a cultural opening now that we haven't had in the past. So that enables us, I think, to better connect the people who are struggling with people who can help. So with dedicated advocates like Ms. Swap, with government officials of the FCC and HHS and VA, I'm confident we can embed 988 in the national consciousness relatively quickly. And I hope we will do that in the time to come.
Thank you for that. And I do know that you are active on social media. I follow you and have a dedicated follower on your Twitter feed. So it's fantastic. If anyone's not following Chairman Pai, you really should. David Kozlowski, talk to us a little about what is social health and what is a social health curriculum. I know that you and Heidi have been working on this together. Curious to know, give us really a thumbnail sketch of what this entails.
Well, first off, I just want to thank Ajit for working so hard for the center working so hard for it. And I'm sure you're going to ask me that question a little bit. I'll have a lot to say on that, but I just want to thank you again very much. So as far as social health goes, I'm going to use a very similar thing that the senator mentioned when we first started talking. He said, like, if you were to ask a bunch of people if they have mental health issues, there's that stigma behind it. Even in 2020, we're all very well aware that there's a stigma behind mental health. Well, I do a similar social experiment when I have large groups of people. Let's say there's 100 people in a room. I'll ask them, I'll say, okay, first thing I say to them, raise your hand if you struggle past, present, or future with mental health. Everybody starts looking around. There's like maybe a couple people that are like, hey, I go to counseling. They're proud of it. They have no shame whatsoever. Hard to get a lot of people to raise their hand. Then right after I say, now, raise your hand if you've struggled past, present, or future with relationships. The whole entire room raises their hands. Okay. So I want to give you that little bit of a visual there before I introduce what social health is, because by definition, social health is simply the ability to build, maintain, and improve relationships with, but not limited to, family members, friends, classmates, teachers, coworkers, and online connections while pursuing an optimal relationship with self. If we're to look up the definition of the word relationship, it simply means a connection between two or more people, places, or things. So as a mental health professional for the past 21 years, I'm front row seats to the stigma of mental health. Having been raised in Southern California, all my friends, myself included, because even though I said I want to be a pro football player, my dream was to be a pro surfer. They just didn't have surfing scholarships to college, so that was a problem. But all my friends grew up working for companies like Vans, DC Shoes, all the big action sports companies out there, the X Games, all that stuff was going on. And I was always in admiration how well they could get the attention of the youth just like that. They would get the right athletes. They would get the right clothes. Like, they were so good at branding. Every youth was paying attention to what they're wearing, with their, whatever they were selling. I always sat there and I thought, like, man, here we are with mental health. I'm a mental health professional. And for me to get people to talk about mental health, it has to be in a closed room, quiet, with confidentiality, like all these stipulations, papers have to be signed. But once they started talking about it, everyone could relate to struggles with mental health, regardless to what extreme they were. Maybe they're a parent that has a child struggle with mental health, and they think, oh, I know nothing about depression. I have no idea. I can't relate to my kid. After a couple sessions, the parents look at me going, man, I think I've had depression my whole life. I didn't even know what it was. So many people were so unfamiliar for so long. I thought to myself, like, man, too bad mental health wasn't branded so poorly. Now, let me say something real quick. I'm saying the word mental has had an association with the word crazy for as long as I've been alive. Now, is this right? Absolutely, it's not right. I'm so glad we've made so much progress towards softening that stigma and opening up the conversation, or else we would not be on this panel right here, right now. And from a branding perspective, when I'm trying to get kids to work on their mental health, I don't care how they work on their mental health, they need to work on it. We need to get them there. So I'd have to play with wordplay for a very long period of time. Come to find out, thanks to doctors like I'll be telling you a little bit about Dr. Lieberman at UCLA, a lot of research has been coming down the pipeline in the past 10 to 12 years that's showing one specific thing that all human beings have in common. We're all social creatures. In fact, our brains were hardwired to be social. Most people know of Brene Brown, a lot of research that comes out in books right now. So everything that we're getting from social psychology research was pointing in the direction that our longevity in our life, we have, in fact, cool little statistic, 64.4% more likelihood of a woman overcoming breast cancer if she has 2 to 3 girlfriends to go to lunch with. We're finding that if you are a person that has good relationships, you get better referrals to better hospitals like the Huntsman Hospital. You get better opportunities. You get people going out of their way because life is hard, but they're going out of their way to share resources, knowledge, and information with you if you've learned the skill of relationship building. Now, Heidi and I, we always talk about this. When people drop their kids off at school, the first and most important thing that parents say when they drop their kids off isn't, hey, I hope my kid gets 100% on their math assignment today. Even though they may want them to, the most important thing is I hope they make friends. I hope they don't get bullied. I hope they have a good experience. Hope they like their teacher. Hope their teacher likes them. Relationships are at the forefront of everything that we do. We eat, sleep, and breathe relationships, business and personal. Social health is just introducing that in a curriculum form inside of schools with the psychology backing that it already has. We've got lots of research collecting digital, collecting dust on digital shelves that we can be sharing with our children about how to build these fortified relationships. And not just with people like, for example, our moms and dads, those are very important, but also people online, also our relationships with our technology. So in a nutshell, that's what social health is: fortifying those relationships, building, maintaining, improving family, friends, online, all while improving the relationship with yourself.
Thank you for that. I'm going to stay with you, David, because you've talked about, you and Heidi have been working on the local level to really bring this curriculum to pass. My question is, on the federal or the national level, how successful do you think it would be, other than money? And I hope that we don't always just look as the money. We've got to really put into place the program. What would we need to do to scale a program like this across the nation?
Well, Matt, when I was talking about mental health, right? Mental health, if you're to look at it, I like to look at it this way. Mental health stands on its own. Physical health stands on its own. Education system, those are all 3 different systems that stand on their own. Now, they do interface quite a bit, right? So if someone breaks their leg and, they got to go to the hospital, obviously, they can get time off of school, whatever they may need. But what we're looking for is a bridge. So to answer your question, I'm going to share with you a story that you guys may have known about this, but physical education, the government after World War I stepped in to intercede and make physical education more of a mandate inside of our schools. Because after World War I, they found out, I believe the study showed that around 1/3 of the members of our armed forces were not in good enough shape to be in the armed forces. So they said, wow, we got to change this. So government steps in, start making policies and procedures and make sure that they taught physical education inside the schools. So a direct answer to your question is, I believe in 2021, a lot of our issues that we're having specifically with youth are actually social health issues. So if we're going to implement something such as physical education, because a need after we go to war and realize, hey, this is not good for us to not be physically fit, maybe it's possible to consider that we introduce a social health system in our education system. Because I got to comment on something that Heidi said. This is my own anxiety. Here I am, I'm on a panel with a woman. She's saying all these great things about me, that I was her son's therapist before her son passed from suicide. This is extraordinarily uncomfortable for me and extremely motivating for me at the same time, because her son was the first young person I'd ever lost to suicide. Worked in this profession for 17 years. Everyone, when I say everyone, a lot of people are like, oh, you're God's gift to suicide prevention because you work with only basically suicidal kids. You've never had one be successful. And I knew that was a lot of luck, but I also knew that it was a lot of me just getting good relationships with kids. And I knew that someday this was going to happen where I was going to lose someone. The way we lost her son was not the way I'd imagined it. 2 hours after he and I just met, I hadn't seen him for months, right? We just came back, something was going on. 2 hours after we met, my phone's blowing up, jumping in my pocket that he had passed away. I run down the hospital and I have to look her husband and her in the eyes and hope that they can forgive me for obviously seeing something that was there but wasn't there. I don't know. To this day, we're still trying to figure it out. My point is that in today's world in 2021, there's a lot of stories like Heidi's story. There's lots, right? If we were to consider this a social health crisis, what I look at is that our suicide epidemic, this is a social health issue that has very serious mental health side effects. Now, if we were to look at, and I know the mental health organization, I forget who was it that started the hashtag a couple years ago, they said before stage 4. And I loved how they used the cancer analogy for mental health. They said, let's get people that are struggling with mental health help before stage 4. Well, I'd like to share with you that I believe social health, which is education, informed consent, and getting better data from students that are talking about the relationships, the one they're working with and the ones they're struggling with along the process of their whole entire school from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade, would help us come up with better policies and procedures and see exactly what our youth really need. Because just giving them little surveys here and there randomly just doesn't give the best data from them. And also too, if we look this from a government perspective, is it a possibility that our social health issues are at the level enough that we could even consider putting this in a curriculum from K through 12? I think it is. But again, I'm just a guy that's on, I'm in the laboratory all day long talking with people who struggle with this. So to me, I'm like math, English, building relationships. Wow, those sound like really good independent living skills. Being able to work, being a young person, being able to work for what the young people call a boomer. I don't know if you guys knew that. Call older people boomers. I know a lot of young kids that can't work with older people because they don't know how to interface with people face to face like that. So.
Thank you, David. I'm mindful of the time. I know that Chairman Pai has a commitment here in a couple of minutes, and I want to ask him one last question before, and Chairman Pai, we do excuse you if you do need to leave after this question. But I wanted to, while we have you here, you've spoken publicly on the need to clarify the liability shield created by Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. And I want to ask you if you see a nexus between what's reliable on social media feeds and its impact on mental health. There's, clearly social media has that impact. I'm curious to know, as you've dealt with these issues at the commission.
A very good question. I think that it's a double-edged sword, to be clear. On one hand, social media can give those who are struggling a sense that there are others within their community who they're able to connect to in a way they couldn't necessarily in the physical world. And I think back for myself, for instance, I grew up in a small town in rural Kansas, and in the 1970s, 1980s, when I was a kid, basically the only people you could interact with were the people in your immediate physical proximity. But the power of the internet, of course, is that it's able to unite you with people from Utah and around the world, which is a great thing. On the other hand, of course, as you pointed out, it can also be a forum that is very challenging. Of course, a lot of the personal attacks that come upon you, the misinformation that is out there that might lead you to think that the world is not as it actually is. That is some of the downside. And I'm not sure how it's going to proceed. I think that unfortunately, of late at least, it seems to have done a lot more harm than good in the sense that it doesn't really seem to unite us as a people as much as I would like anyway. So I think we need to have a conversation, not necessarily in the halls of government perhaps, but in our homes and in our schools about how do we use this powerful tool of the internet to help unite us. It's an incredible disseminator of good information, but it can also drive us apart. And how to strike that happy medium, I think, is going to be critical, and not necessarily just for the people like us, obviously I'm 48 as of yesterday. And so I've, feel in some ways I can sort of filter out what's real and what's not. But for those kids who are very impressionable, who might think that they are all alone or that the world is really ganging up on me, when you're 15, that can seem to be your world. And that's not the world that we want them to know. We want them to know that they're not alone, that they're loved. And if they're struggling, there's someone there who's more than willing to help. And that's the kind of internet connectivity we need to promote in this country.
Thank you for that. And again, if you do need to leave for the commitment that you have, we're grateful that you were here today.
No, I very much apologize that I have to, giving more remarks. But I want you to know again that the stories that I've heard from all of you, from Heidi, from David, from the other David, from the congressman, and from you, Matt, I think are really inspiring me. I'm leaving the FCC soon, but I can tell you that even as a private sector individual, I'm going to continue to advocate for this cause. It's something that matters to me personally, and just know that there is a groundswell of support for the good work you're trying to do. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. God bless you all. And I look forward to continue to advocate for 988 and the cause of suicide prevention and mental health and social health, as you put it very well, in the years to come.
Hey, Chairman Pai, I just want to mention, I mentioned to a classroom of kids the other day about the 988 number coming out. And one of the girls, just want to let you know what she said. She said, good, it's about time, because if it takes too much time, it doesn't make too much sense.
That's right.
If it takes so time to like dial all those numbers, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna let him know you said that. So there you go.
That's exactly right. I mean, we want to capture what she just said, put it in a bottle, and let everyone sip from it in the time to come.
That'd be a good hashtag right there.
Exactly right. Thanks so much for your great work, David, and Ms. Swap and Mr. Huntsman, everybody. It's been wonderful.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
We're going to ask, just if everyone's schedules permit, I thought that we would have a couple more questions, and I wanted to get in with David Huntsman, talking a little more about the curriculum that Heidi and David Kozlowski talked about, the importance of social health curriculum in schools. David Huntsman, curious to know your thoughts on that, and if you see some synergies there between the private and the public partnerships.
Absolutely. And we applaud their efforts and all that they're doing. That's the right conversation. That's the right focus. When we first sat down as a foundation, started thinking about mental health broadly and how we can have the most impact, we wanted to focus on underserved communities. And then we concluded that, well, that pretty much includes everyone when it comes to mental health. We're all underserved communities just because of, the limited resources. And so we made the decision early on to focus on a couple of groups in particular, young adults. That's something that is near and dear to us as we're raising our families. But also because of our partnership with the University of Utah, they have a lot of young adults there on campus, and it's a great place for us to start as we begin to address this challenge. And when you talk about anxiety and depression, the most common forms of mental health, it manifests itself at a young age, and that's where we really need to be focused. This is a population that the young adults, young people, even adolescents in some cases, that are most willing to talk about this, also in ways that my generation may have a hard time. I see the progress and the improvement that we're making. We still have a long ways to go. The stigma is still very real. It exists. There's still discrimination out there against emotional health as compared to physical health. Those are all challenges, but I see our young people and how they talk about it. They talk about it differently than my generation. I look at my mother, and this is no knock to her, but her generation, they recognize mental health as a thing, but they're kind of old school, and they were kind of brought up that, you don't really need to talk about it. You just, go to work and, pull yourselves up by your bootstraps. And if you ignore it, it'll go away. And we look at them as being a little bit antiquated, and maybe how they address it in much the same way our children look at me and, my age groups and how we talk about it is a little bit antiquated. And so I do see, the young adults in many ways taking the lead and, and setting the example for the rest of us to follow. But one thing I did want to mention, when we talk about underserved communities, one of the priorities that we're going to have, will be addressing rural communities, because we know that rural areas in particular struggle with provider shortages. And this is going to show how technology and capable I am. I hope you can see it. It's a map of the state of Utah for those of you that can't, but this picture right here, most of our state is red. And the red represents counties in the state of Utah that don't have a single practicing child or adolescent psychiatrist in the entire county. That's 20 out of our 29 counties. And the underserved rural communities, if you're a young parent and you have a child that's struggling, what do? There's nowhere to go. There's no place to take somebody that's struggling. And, so when we talk about, providing more resources and training our young people to think about this in terms of profession and, raising their awareness as they go into the communities to be able to help in these areas, that's all a really important conversation, and we want to support that absolutely.
Thank you for that. I'm mindful of the time. I know that it's a busy time for many folks, so I'm going to turn to Congressman Stewart with just one last question. And it goes back to what Heidi and David Kozlowski spoke about with the social health curriculum. Congressman, are there any steps we can take on a federal level to encourage schools across the country to take up programs like a social health curriculum? It seems that we need to bring some attention to it at the national level.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the last thing I want to do is federalize education. The last thing I want to do is to empower Washington, D.C. to have more say in our lives of how we educate our kids. But this is an important exception to that. And that is, the federal government can and should set standards and have apply that pressure to local school districts. And sometimes it's not necessarily apply pressure. It's not like the local school districts or educators don't want to do this. I think a better way to describe it would be to say, provide resources, provide the advice and the counsel that they may need. That particularly rural school boards, as David was just saying, they have particular challenges in funding and resources available to them. And again, I think there's something that the federal government could provide that would, fill a gap that no one else is quite capable. And Matt, as we go forward, and I know we are perhaps over time, I'll just say this very quickly. There are things we need to do. I look forward to, as we said with Chairman Pai and others, I look forward to advertising, and so that 2 years from now, everyone thinks 988 just like they think 911. The other thing we have to do is we have to adequately provide funding for these call centers. The last thing we want to do is have people call and know that, well, I call 988, but then not have anyone answer the phone. If your house is on fire, you can't call the fire department and then say, well, we'll be there Tuesday. And you can't do the same thing with the mental health crisis. If you're in the middle of a mental health crisis, if you're worried about your children or your neighbor or your father or your roommate, you need to have the resources when that phone rings, that people who are trained and capable of helping are on the other end of the line. And there's other legislation that we can move as well. One of the keys to this is, as I said earlier, helping understand the differences between communities. And the piece of legislation we have, the Suicide Prevention Act of Transparency, allows for the sharing of information between communities and states, which we don't do now, so that we can learn some of these lessons. The information's there, but it may not be available, and it will help make that available. Those are just some ideas, again, Matt, as we conclude, to say we're really glad we're here. We're so grateful for everyone on this panel and the participants, their stories and their examples. But we have more work to do, and we look forward to engaging that. And we'll stay engaged with that. Again, thank you for the opportunity to be with you today.
Thank you, Congressman. And with that, will bring today's symposium to a close. Thanks again to all of our participants for sharing your insights with us. I wish we had more time. And thank you to the many viewers across the country who joined us on Zoom and Facebook Live. As many of you know, the mission of the Hatch Foundation is to promote civility and solutions to the nation's most pressing problems. And it's fair to say that today's discussion brought us one step closer to achieving that goal. We hope you've enjoyed today's programming and will consider joining us for future events. Stay safe and healthy out there, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you,
All
Matt.
right, thank you. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone, for listening.